Ladies and gentlemen, hello again, welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name's Graham, we're back in X-Plane 10 and we're at Glasgow Airport on the west coast of Scotland. Looking ahead of us you can see Loch Lomond up here, the Upper Clyde, and you can see the M8 motorway running down from the Erskine Bridge here, all the way down and towards the city centre. We're going to be flying the FlyJSim 727 version 2. We're here in an American liveried 727-100 flying from Glasgow to London. Not exactly a prototypical colour scheme for the route in question, but that doesn't matter. It's a nice looking jet and that's all that really I'm interested in today. If you've seen the previous videos, you'll know that normally once I've done one departure and set up, I'd move on to just the flying procedures. Well, in this case, there's a few items I did on my previous FlyJSim video that were not strictly correct. So what I'm going to do is a very quick cold and dark setup, then we'll get airborne and do a radio navigation aids departure. I've also updated the pilot notes here for to more closely mirror what I use in real life on the Airbus. Normally a pilot would fly the same aircraft type day in, day out for a good number of years without moving between any major transport types. In simulators it's a little bit different, you tend to move back and forth between sim models quite frequently. The other thing is when you're operating a multi-crew aircraft, checklists are exactly that. They're a check that you've done the flows correctly. So you do the procedure or the flow and then you do the checklist to verify that everything's been done. In this case I'm going to use the pilot notes more as a read and do kind of procedure, just to make sure everything's done correctly. So again, I've rewritten these to do what, or to fill in some of the gaps that I had in the previous video. We'll start working through it. So the second pilot would make sure the parking brake is set, it is, and make sure that we've got pressure checked on the brakes. Well, there's no brake pressure there at the moment, so we'll assume the aircraft is chalked and we'll make sure there's some pressure before we go any further. I'll turn the nav lights on and the logo lights on. The aircraft's on stand. There's no GPU attached, so the lights won't show, but whenever there's electrical power, those lights will come on just to make sure people around the aircraft know it's powered up. Next thing is the flight engineer. Hydraulic engine pumps 1 and 2 on. I don't think these would ever be switched off in real life. Certainly in the 727, the 737, starting cold and dark, you'd expect the engine pumps to be switched on all the time. Because if the engine's not running, the pump's not running, it doesn't make any difference. So you'd only really switch them off in a failure case. So I'll switch those on so I don't forget about them later. We'll turn the battery on by closing the cap here. And we're going to go as quickly as we can. So I'll start the APU to the on position and then hold it up to start. See the lights flicker as it powers itself up, and we'll watch the AGT rise. Once the AGT's up, we'll close the field switch and close the generator switch to put the APU on bus. There we go. So the AGT's rising. I close the field switch and close the generator switch. That brings the aircraft to life. Pneumatic brake pressure is rising, and for some reason the hydraulic pressure is increased as well there. I don't know quite how it's done that, but I'm not worried about that. It's good enough for the sim. Okay, so on to the Pto Procedures on the overhead panel. You'd normally work down through these top to bottom, just to get everything set up. Make sure all these caps are closed. The first item on here is the stall warner check. So that's all the way down here and then back up the stall warner. Down to test and then back off again. Perfect. Compass, it looks to be automatically slaving. I don't know if these are implemented, but I'm not going to mess with them just now. That's fine. On the center panel, I'll arm the exit lights by closing the cap here. On the next screen, no smoking signs on and the fasten seatbelt signs on. We're finished fueling, so we'll fasten the seatbelts just now. Transponder, it's off, perfect, and up here the window heat. Now I made a mistake in the previous video. I used these switches here for the pitot heaters. These are still window heat. There's the left 1 and left 2 window, right 1 and right 2 window. Obviously on the 737 the probe switches are up here, down here on the 727. So just a little trap to watch out for. Everything else is set correctly. That's the cockpit prep complete. Just an abridged version to get the model going as quickly as we can. I've also added some notes here to remember all the items we've got to do to get the aircraft ready. So first things first, we'll align the inertial navigator. That's quite easy. I'll flick it to standby position, make sure I've got pause selected on the dial here, and we're in stand 18 at Glasgow, so I'll enter the position. It's 5552 north, and it is west 4 degrees 26.0 minutes. Insert. That's all that should really be necessary. I'll click it to the align mode just now, and waypoint 0 is the current position. So waypoint 0 and the current position match. I'll let the system align onto the status page here, and it's 9. That's going to count down to below 5, and once it's below 5 we can flick it into nav mode and we're good to go. So next item is verify the weight and balance. Over here, really what I'm interested in is the CG, it's within limits, the weights are good, and I've got 25,000 pounds of fuel on board. A good rule of thumb is 10,000 pounds per hour, so that's about 2.5 hours with no reserves. That's perfect, more than enough to get us to London. Next item is to set the takeoff bugs. So I'll open the V-speed card, I'm going to do a flaps 15 departure, and on the FlyJSim 727 the bugs down here set automatically, so as I click through the options you can see it sets the correct bug speed. Flap 15 is what I want. What it doesn't do is set the internal bug. I'm going to set the internal bug to V2, which is 132, which is around about there. Next thing to do is to set the pressurization out on the flight engineer panel. I'm going to go to 31,000 feet today. Obtain the departure clearance from air traffic. Well, we know we'd be doing the New Galloway departure. I'll put the link to the charts in the video description. Stopping at an altitude of 6,000 feet. Transponder code is 4651, my favourite transponder code, and we've set the alert altitude. That's fine. Radioids and HSI. This is where it's going to get a little bit different on this video. Let me find a view that actually works for this. There we go. So we want to have as much of the radio navigation system set up before we go flying as possible. The first thing I need is the Glasgow beacon, Golf Oscar Whiskey. It's 115.4. And you'll see on this radio I can tune the active and the standby. The active frequency is indicated by this, so the standby dial changes depending on which light's on. It can get quite confusing, but what I found really useful is to keep Nav1 and Nav2 radios set with the same frequency pairs, and basically just use Nav2 to look a little bit ahead, if that makes sense. Hopefully it will as we go through the video. So 115.4 for Glasgow and 1110.4 for Perth, which is the next VOR we're going to use. The Glasgow New Galloway departure is really quite interesting. We're going to use 3 VORs and NDB just to get out of Glasgow. The NDB I'm interested in is New Galloway 399. It's already tuned on both the radios here. I want to make sure that the HSI is set correctly as well. It's the 053 radial off the Golf Oscar Whiskey. 053 set, and I'll make sure the heading bug is set as well. Again, we can put that on the P2 side as well. It doesn't really matter, it's one of the things we can dispense with to make flying the sim a little bit easier. But we can use this, we can make this quite useful as well. So radio aids and the HSI are set. We'd also load the inertial waypoints at this point. If we're going to do a radio navigation departure and then onto an Atlantic track, for example, or inertial flight plan, we'd probably have the first waypoint as being the end of the radio navigation procedure. So 0 would be the current position and 1 would be the end of the navigation procedure. I'm not really interested in that today though, it's really just aligning so that I can see a ground speed from it. Next thing I want to do is set the autopilot and flight director as well. On the previous video I didn't do much with those. I'm going to leave it set to turn knob. The only difference here is I'm going to, rather than pre-select a pitch, I'm going to select IS hold. When I put the autopilot on, it will fly the V2 speed or whatever the internal bug is set to. So I think that's the most useful way to do it. Okay, that's the aircraft prepped for the departure. And then we get onto the before start procedure. At this point, we'd be waiting for all the customers or all the passengers to get on the aircraft, all the bags to be loaded, and it'd take quite a few minutes from getting on the aircraft. I want to do this as quickly as possible without waiting for the inertial system to time out. So I'm going to use the little cheat hotspot here. It says ready nav, I'll click it, status drops down to 0, and I'll flick it over to nav. That's the inertial system all ready to go. And I'll flick it over to tracking ground speed. If we had any waypoints to load, that'd be more than enough time, but just to get it going, we'll do it quickly. So, second pilot, make sure the signs are on and on. If we'd been fueling, the seatbelt signs would be off, so make sure they're on. Transponder will turn on, so the ground surveillance radar can see us. We'll turn the beacon on and verify that the INS is in the nav mode, which it is. On the flight engineer panel, make sure the fuel cross feeds are closed. They would normally be closed after landing, but cold and dark it starts with them open. Make sure the fuel pumps are on. We need one per tank, so I'll switch the aft pumps on, one in each tank. The reason I'm only using 3 is there's quite a high current draw from these, so I don't want a lot of power being drawn from the APU unnecessarily. One pump per tank is enough to start it. Make sure the galleys are off, again minimising the load, and make sure the packs are off. We can't start the engines with the packs on, it doesn't have enough pressure. But I'll turn the bleeds on, so all 4 bleed switches to on. And you see we should have about 30 psi. Excellent. That gets to the point where we're ready to start the engines. One of the great things about the FlyJSim model is the pushback. So if I come to the outside view just now, you can see that if I click this button here, Show Ghost, I can actually manoeuvre or tell the pushback crew where to put the aircraft. It's really quite useful. It's a visual representation of where you want the aircraft. So I'll release the parking brake with the keystroke, click the auto button, and the aircraft pushes back. I'm now in a good position to start the engines. So it's really quite straightforward. I'll make sure that I've got 30 psi. I'll come up here, open number 3, flick it to ground, make sure the start valve opens, and once we've got 20% N2, I'll introduce some fuel and keep an eye on the pushback as well. Having 3 crew would really be easy, but it's a bit more difficult when you're just by yourself. You hear that click, the start valve's closed. That means normally we'd wait for that engine to stabilise, but as the start valve's closed, we're back to 30 psi, we can start number 2. Start valve's open for number 2. N2 is turning, still pushing back. There we go, 20%. Introduce the fuel. Look up here. Now the start valve is closed and we can start number 1. Again, this is the quick way to do it. You wouldn't do it like this in the real aircraft, I don't think. Number 1, final engine to start. Aircraft's not moving now, so I'll set the parking brake. There's 20%. Put the fuel in. And yeah, that's good. Let's have a look at the procedures here. So the engines are running. We get rid of the ground crew, make sure they're not going to get run over by us as we taxi off, and then we'll do the procedures here. So engine 2 and the APU bleeds close. We're finished with the APU bleeds and we don't use engine 2 bleeds under normal conditions. So turn those off. Generators 1, 2 and 3 on. So close the field, close the gen. Again, the engineer would normally verify that the frequencies are all correct before bringing these onto the bus. We know they're going to be fine in the sim, so we'll just skip through that. Now that we've got the generators on, the aircraft's internal systems, internal generators can provide power. So we can turn the APU off. We'll trip the gen, trip the field, and turn it off. So now with the main generators running, we can turn the rest of the pumps on. Just watch the kilowatt or the power consumption here as I put these pumps on. See them increase on each click? That's the reason we didn't have them all running off the APU, because when I bring the generators on, that'd be quite a power changeover. Fuel pumps are on. Put the hydraulic electric pumps on, and I'll put the galley on as well. Pressurization, or the bleed system's all stabilized. I'll turn the packs on. and make sure the pressurization is set to flight. Next thing, the P2, or you'll be doing it simultaneously, but we'll make sure that the start switches are closed. Make sure the engine anti-ice is up here. We don't need it today, it's nice weather conditions. Set the takeoff trim by clicking the hotspot. Make sure the rudder trim is neutral, which it is. Set the flaps to 15 for departure. And make sure the speed brakes are down. At this point, there'll probably be a checklist to do. We'd ask air traffic for taxi clearance, and once we're cleared to taxi, we'll turn the lights on. Just have a quick check round. And we're good to go. We're going to taxi out to runway 05 at Glasgow. Oh, the brake's coming off. And you'll see on the before takeoff checks, there's a few items we've got to do on the taxi out as well. If necessary, we'll stop and do those standing still, but we should be able to do most of them taxiing out. Quick brake check before we turn the corner. Okay, so now we're around the corner, we'll do a flight control check. You can see the flight control indications down here. So. Flight control check's fine. We'd set the weather radar on once we're not pointing at the terminal. It takes a while to warm up, so I'll click that just now. One of the things I missed on the previous video was the auto brake. It's all the way up here on the 727. On the 737 it's down here. Auto brake's on. On the pitot heats on. Anti-ice, yeah, don't need that just now. And once the weather radar is warmed up, we can turn on TCAS. It seems to be on the same screen on this. Normally your TCAS would be in a modern aircraft or an older aircraft that's been retrofitted with TCAS. You'd have a digital VSI here that would display the TCAS information. But for this one here, we'll click the TCAS button and it's on the radar there. Flight engineer's got some items to do as well. On the 727, you'd normally do a departure with the packs on. And it's got a system called the auto pack trip that if it loses thrust, it'll turn the packs off to preserve the power. So we need to make sure that system's on. It's up here. Auto pack trip to normal, and make sure the fuel heaters are selected off. That's all the before takeoff check items done. We'll just wait for air traffic to clear us and make sure the cabin crew are all ready. Because we're taxiing out, we'll just go straight off and do it. So there's the landing lights coming on. Turn the taxi lights off and put the strobes on, just basically all the way across the lights here. I've written some notes for the takeoff procedure as well, but we'll talk through that. I think on my previous video yesterday I mentioned using 95%. A little bit further reading suggests 92 is probably more appropriate for the climb thrust. I really like this V-speed card here as well. It's really quite useful. If you operate the same aircraft for months and months, then you get used to the speeds that you have to use. But as we chop and change in flight sims, it's nice to have the speeds displayed up there. So here's runway 05. Make sure there's nothing on the approach. Make sure the runway's clear. And we've done all the checks. Remember on this departure, I'm going to be making more use of the autopilot than perhaps you would in real life. Some people might view that as cheating. For me, you're operating an aircraft designed to be operated by 3 crew, and you're doing it all by yourself. So any assistance you can get from the autopilot, then that's pretty good. On aircraft like the 737-300, it's less relevant because it's a little bit more automated. Okay, so takeoff thrust. and setting 2.15 EPR. We'll keep adjusting the thrust up to 80 knots and then we'll leave it set where it is. So there's 2.15, 80 knots. V1, rotate. Positive climb, gear up. I'm looking to climb at V2 plus 10, that's that first white bug there. Depending on the weights, about 12.5 to 15 degrees is a good target. And the first item is the thrust reduction at 1500 feet. What I'm going to do is put the autopilot in, and it's in IS mode, so it's going to capture that V2. I'll make it V2 plus 10. There's 1500 feet, bring the thrust back to 92%. And then we'll capture the radial and fly outbound. We'll start accelerating at 3000 feet. So I'll use my keystroke here to put the aircraft into heading mode, and it'll follow the heading. We're going out this on this radial to about 5 miles. When we're climbing, I want to make sure that I've got alt select on, this yellow FMA there. That makes sure that it will capture the selected altitude when it's climbing. Quite important not to forget that. That's 3000 feet, so I'll come into pitch hold mode and I'll reduce the pitch by 5 degrees, let the aircraft accelerate, and once we're above 162 I'll select flaps 5. Just watching the distance as well, 5 miles I'm going to turn on to 247. Everything happens simultaneously here, that's where extra crew members really help. So flaps 5, next item is 190 flaps 2. There's 5 miles, onto course 247, 190, flap 2. And I'll set the target speed up to 220 now. 200, flap 0. And then what I'll do is flick it back into IS hold and it should capture that speed. 2000 feet to go to the level. I'll change onto the Perth beacon. And then it's course 236 away from Perth. So 236, see these deviation bars quite close already, so I'll keep the turn going. Come out to 1000 feet to go, what I'll do is I'll just start reducing the thrust to reduce the vertical speed. So we've got flap 0, no lights, so gear can go up and off, auto brake we can disarm. And then I can accelerate up to 250 knots. We're clean, so I'll lose the V-speed card as well. You'll find with the 727 that you've got to bring the thrust levers quite far back to maintain speed, especially at low altitude. The flight director modes here seem to be related to how the autopilot's configured it. In real life I think they're quite different on this aircraft, but we'll put nav lock on, or we should be able to get nav or heading, which is what we've got selected, and then we've got a reasonable flight director. There's 250 knots, so I'll make sure the thrust is quite far back. Tracking outbound on this radial, the next thing we need to go to is Turnberry, which is 117.5. So what I'll do is I'll get that frequency ready on the nav2. And also on nav1, making sure I'm tuning the side that doesn't have the light. And then it should, yeah, so they're still looking at Perth. I've got the frequency selected for Turnberry. What I'll do is I'll use nav2 and that will make it appear on the pointer here. I'm looking to capture the 187 radio, so this is where this side's quite useful. I'll bring it around to 187. Oh, went too far. There we go, 187. This is the problem with not having auto thrust. You take your eye off it for a second and the speed increases, so just be careful. I'll bring the thrust back a little bit. Finding the 727 model is exceptionally slippery. It's really quite fast. But it's a nice looking model, especially in the, I think the 100 looks quite nice. It's a lot of engines for not very many seats. It's pretty good. So by this point we'd probably expect to get cleared up to higher altitude, probably about 18,000. So I set 18,000 as the target. I'll flick it back into the IS hold mode and remember to click Alt Cell. The aircraft will pitch up to capture 250 knots and I'll bring the thrust up to 92%. There we go. And I'll bring nav 1 onto Turnberry now. 187, and then we'll start a turn to intercept that radial. Again, if you want to make life a little bit easier, you can go down here and select VOR lock, and that will capture the VOR deviation bar all by itself. Makes life a little bit easier. Save VOR lock as initiated. So the next point is as I get towards Turnberry, about 17D from Turnberry, I've got another turn to make. But here we are passing through flight level 100. First of all, I'll make sure the pressurization is working. Excellent, I'll turn off the landing lights. And we need to increase speed. So what I'll do is I'll flick back into pitch hold. I'll reduce the pitch by 3 or 4 degrees. And I'll set the target to 280. If I'd left it in airspeed hold, sorry, and twisted the speed target there, it would have leveled off. Whereas I want to just reduce the pitch attitude a little bit. Once it captures the speed, I'll go back to IS hold. I've actually got some keystrokes for this button here, this knob here, which is I find pretty useful, and also a keystroke for heading select as well. So another 9 miles to go. I need another radio aid, so I've got 399, that's New Galloway, tuned on the NDB. What I want to do is just have the RMI pointer looking at it. So with a bit of luck, this should come around. When I get to 17 miles or so, I'm going to turn to follow a track of 141 towards New Galloway. We're finished with Perth. The next item I need on the VORs is going to be Dean Cross 115.2. But still tracking Turnberry just now. And once we do the turn towards New Galloway, it's exactly the same as we've done in the radio navigation video. We're going to imagine the track here. Good thing is at 180, 200 odd knots, you can more or less dispense with wind drift. And we'll just pull the tail, push the head of the needle to get it onto the course we want. About 145 inbound towards New Galloway will be fine. Back onto IS hold now, and it will maintain 280 knots. You see when I'm commanding, when I've got the autopilot set to IS hold, the flight director will adjust the pitch command bar by itself here. I don't know if that's prototypical or not, but it really is helpful in the sim. I really like the flying aircraft on the pitch command here. It makes life quite easy. So what I'll do is come around to about 145 or so. There's 17 miles. I'll push the button to change it into heading mode, and it will start the turn. We'll turn and track towards New Galloway. I'm finished with Turnberry, so I'll go on to Dean Cross, and I'll tune the Honley frequency on here as well. And it's probably about 139 from New Galloway towards Dean Cross. There we go. Just make sure we're tracking towards New Galloway correctly. When we get to 1,000 feet to go, you'll hear the aircraft alert you to the fact that you're approaching the target altitude. And that's a good position to start reducing the thrust as well. There we go, there's the alert. So I'll just start bringing the thrust back, and that'll reduce the vertical speed. It should make capturing and maintaining a speed when you level off a little bit easier if you've already done a significant thrust reduction there. Good rule of thumb in the real world is when you're approaching the last 2,000 feet or so of the climb, make sure your vertical speed is around or less than 1,500 feet per minute. That way, if there's any traffic above you, you'll not generate any TCAS events for them. There's a final altitude alert at 200 feet to go, and we should capture quite nicely. Once we get to New Galloway, that's the end of the departure. Alt select has turned green here, and that means we've no longer control of the speed, so we just have to bring the thrust back to maintain the speed we want. Up to 300 knots or so is fine. Let's have a look on the outside. So we did another cold and dark setup with my slightly modified procedures. Launched out of Glasgow off runway 05 for the New Galloway departure. If you don't have New Galloway charts available, I'll try and put a link in the description. The Norbo departure is basically the same procedure up until that last turn towards New Galloway. There's the island of Arran here, Prestwick again as we did on the base training video with the IXCG 737, and up towards Loch Lomond, and finally round to Glasgow. So I hope you enjoyed watching the video. I hope it made sense. The radioid departure is quite a high workload environment, so it's quite difficult to fly and talk and keep everything going in the right direction as well. Again, the aircraft is designed to be operated with 3 crew, but the developers have done a really good job of making it an enjoyable aircraft to operate without being overly challenging on the systems front. It's quite tolerant of the switches being in the wrong place. It'll basically let you fly the aircraft anyway. And I've got a lot of memories of flying aircraft in FlyJSim 2004 and earlier that were basically exactly the same. It's a very good machine to fly, it's a very good machine to navigate, and there's just enough systems on the aircraft to keep it interesting as well. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. As always, any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the video comments. Thanks very much for listening to me, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks very much.